They need us more than we need them. That was the phrase. That was the gamble. That was the logic that led to the single most catastrophic economic decision in modern American history. For decades, there has been a quiet arrogance in Washington, a belief that Canada is just the attic of the United States, a friendly, snowy place where we keep the spare resources until we need them. A 51st state in everything but name. The assumption was simple. America holds the cards. America has the consumer market. America has the military. If push came to shove, Canada would fold. Well, as of this morning, Sunday, January 25th, 2026, we found out what happens when the nice guy finally snaps. 48 hours ago, President Trump signed Executive Order 1/99, imposing a blanket 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, energy, lumber, aluminum, everything. The goal? To force Ottawa to renegotiate the USMCA on terms that would effectively surrender their sovereignty over their own natural resources. The White House expected a delegation of polite Canadians to fly to D.C., hat in hand, begging for a waiver. In a move that no analyst on Wall Street priced in, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, or perhaps his successor, driven by a unified parliament, didn't just issue counter-tariffs. He invoked the National Strategic Reserve Act. He didn't tax the exports, he banned them. As I speak, the valves on the Enbridge mainline are closing. The trains carrying potash to the Midwest are stopping at the border. The uranium shipments destined for American nuclear power plants have been grounded, and the American economy? It isn't just sneezing, it is going into cardiac arrest. Gas prices in the Midwest jumped 80 cents overnight. The Chicago Board of Trade suspended trading on wheat futures because the fertilizer panic is so severe. And the U.S. Department of Energy just issued a red alert for the Texas power grid, not because of the cold, but because the refineries that feed it are starving. In this deep dive, we are going to expose the lie of energy independence. We are going to show you why the United States is chemically, geologically, and strategically addicted to Canada. We are going to break down the three specific commodities, heavy crude, uranium, and potash, that are about to bring the world's largest economy to its knees. This isn't a trade war. This is a siege. And for the first time in history, the United States is on the wrong side of the wall. Let's look at the map. To understand the panic in the White House right now, you have to understand the chemistry of oil. We have been told for 10 years that the U.S. is energy independent. We frack the Permian Basin in Texas. We pump millions of barrels of crude every day. We export oil to the world. So why does it matter if Canada cuts us off? Here is the dirty secret that nobody talks about, the mismatch. The oil that comes out of the ground in Texas is called light sweet crude. It is thin, like water, and low in sulfur. It is great stuff. But here's the problem. The massive refineries in the Gulf Coast, the ones that make your diesel, your jet fuel, and your gasoline, were not built for light sweet crude. They were built in the 1990s and 2000s to process heavy sour crude. This is the thick, sludge-like oil that comes from Venezuela, Mexico, and Canada. These refineries are like massive digestive systems. They invested billions of dollars into cokers and crackers, specifically designed to break down heavy sludge. If you feed these refineries nothing but light Texas oil, they don't work efficiently. They run at 60% capacity. They can't make enough diesel. They literally malfunction. For the last 5 years, since sanctions cut off Venezuela and production dropped in Mexico, the U.S. refining system has had only one lifeline: the Canadian oil sands. Canada sends nearly 4 million barrels of this heavy crude south every single day. It flows through the Keystone Pipeline, the operational parts, the Enbridge mainline, and by rail. It is the blood in the veins of the U.S. industrial machine. When the president slapped tariffs on Canadian energy, he thought he was taxing a competitor. He was actually taxing his own supply chain, but Canada didn't just accept the tax. They played the China card. For years, the U.S. blocked pipelines like Keystone XL because they knew it trapped Canadian oil in the North American market. If Canada can't send it to the coast, they have to sell it to the U.S. at a discount. It's called the WCS discount, Western Canadian Select. It saves U.S. drivers billions of dollars a year. But last year, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion finally fully opened. Canada now has a pipe to the Pacific Ocean. Yesterday, the Canadian Energy Minister announced a strategic partnership with Sinopec, the Chinese state oil giant. They have committed to buying every single barrel of heavy crude that the U.S. rejects. Tankers are already lining up in Vancouver. So what happens to the Midwest? The PADD2 district, the Midwest, relies on Canadian oil for 70% of its refinery feedstock. 70%. Without that oil, the refineries in Illinois, Ohio, and Minnesota have to shut down. You cannot just ship Texas oil up there overnight. There are no pipelines going north-south in that volume. The infrastructure is built to go north to south or west to east. We are looking at a scenario where gas stations in Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis run dry in 72 hours. Not high prices, no gas. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, it's mostly filled with medium sour crude. It can help, but it can't replace 4 million barrels a day of specific heavy grade. And even if it could, the SPR is located in the Gulf, not the Midwest. The arrogance of "we don't need Canada" ignored the physical reality of the pipeline map. We built a continent-wide energy machine, assuming the border didn't exist. Now that the border is a wall, the machine is broken. If you think the gas lines are bad, wait until you check your electric bill. The United States generates about 20% of its electricity from nuclear power. It is the baseload. It is what keeps the lights on when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. But here is a terrifying fact. The United States produces almost zero uranium. We import 95% of the fuel for our reactors. Where did we used to get it? Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. But in 2024, Congress banned Russian uranium imports to punish Putin. That left us with one reliable, secure, massive supplier, Canada. The Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan is the Saudi Arabia of uranium. The Cigar Lake and McArthur River mines produce the highest grade uranium on Earth. Cameco, the Canadian giant, keeps the U.S. nuclear fleet running. When the trade war started, the White House assumed nuclear fuel would be exempt. It wasn't. In a move that shocked the Pentagon, Ottawa designated uranium a critical national security asset. They have paused all export licenses to the U.S. pending a security review. This is a checkmate. Nuclear power plants run on fuel cycles of 18 to 24 months. They don't have years of inventory sitting in the parking lot. Some plants are due for refueling this spring. If they don't get the fuel bundles, they have to power down. If we lose 20% of our grid capacity right as summer approaches, we are looking at rolling blackouts across the eastern seaboard. And unlike oil, you can't just buy uranium on the spot market. It has to be mined, milled, converted, enriched, and fabricated. The supply chain takes years. Canada knows this. They know that without their yellow cake, the U.S. Navy's aircraft carriers don't sail, and the lights in Washington, D.C. go out. This is the quiet leverage. Canada doesn't brag about its military, but it holds the keys to ours. The U.S. Department of Energy is currently scrambling to find alternative supplies in Australia and Namibia. But the logistics aren't there, and guess who has been buying up the African supply? China. By pushing Canada away, we have pushed them into a corner where they might sell that strategic asset to our adversaries. Imagine Chinese reactors powered by Canadian uranium, while American reactors sit cold because of a dispute over lumber tariffs. It is strategic suicide. Energy keeps us moving. Uranium keeps us warm. But this next one, this one keeps us alive. Let's talk about potash. It's a pink salt. You've probably never thought about it, but if you eat food, you depend on it. Potash is the K in NPK fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You cannot grow corn, soy, or wheat at industrial scales without it. The plants get weak, they don't yield, and the food supply collapses. The world has three main sources of potash: Russia, Belarus, sanctioned, unreliable, difficult to ship; Canada, Saskatchewan. Everyone else, tiny amounts. Saskatchewan alone produces nearly 1/3 of the world's supply. But more importantly, it supplies 85% of the potash used by American farmers. 85%. We don't have a backup. There are no massive potash mines in Iowa. When Trump slapped the 25% tariff on all Canadian minerals, he effectively put a 25% tax on every bushel of corn grown in America. But Canada didn't just let us pay the tax. They stopped the trains. The Premier of Saskatchewan, acting in coordination with the Prime Minister, has cited supply chain instability and halted rail shipments south. We are weeks away from the spring planting season. Farmers in the Corn Belt are sitting on their tractors, staring at empty barns. They need that fertilizer now. If they don't put it in the ground in April, there is no crop in October. If Canada keeps the potash north of the border for just 30 days, we miss the planting window. Yields could drop by 30–40%. Do you know what that does to the price of food? Corn feeds the cows. Soy feeds the chickens. The price of beef, chicken, milk, eggs, and bread will double. This is the breakfast tax, and it's entirely self-inflicted. We are already seeing the Big Mac index futures spike. Analysts are predicting a $15 Big Mac by July if this isn't resolved. Canada, meanwhile, has a bumper crop. They have all the fertilizer they need. They can sell their surplus food to the world at record prices, while American farmers go bankrupt. The irony is crushing. The tariffs were supposed to save the American farmer from unfair competition. Instead, they are depriving the American farmer of the one thing he needs to compete. For 100 years, the US and Canada have been like a married couple. We bicker, but we sleep in the same bed. The assumption in Washington was that Canada has nowhere else to go. They are landlocked to the US. They share our culture. They are trapped. That might have been true in 1990. It is not true in 2026. This morning, the Canadian Trade Minister announced the Pacific Gateway Initiative. Ottawa is slashing regulations to fast-track LNG, liquefied natural gas terminals on the West Coast. They are fast-tracking critical mineral exports to Japan, South Korea, and yes, China. The report from RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, calls it the dependency trap exit strategy. Canada is realizing that being 70% dependent on the US for trade is a national security risk. They are willing to take a short-term recession to break that chain. This is the nightmare scenario for the Pentagon. We rely on Canada for NORAD. The radar stations that detect Russian missiles over the Arctic are on Canadian soil. We rely on Canadian aluminum to build our F-35 fighter jets. Canada provides 70% of US aluminum imports. We rely on Canadian steel for our tanks. If Canada decides to become neutral in the trade war, if they say, we will trade with everyone equally, suddenly the US defense industrial base has a gaping hole in it. We can't build jets without their metal. We can't fly them without their fuel. We can't spot incoming missiles without their land. And the zombie USMCA, it's dead. The free trade agreement is effectively suspended. We are back to 1930s protectionism. But in the 1930s, the US was self-sufficient. In 2026, the US is a specialized economy that needs raw materials. And we just declared war on the supplier. So how does this end? It ends with a phone call. It ends with the President of the United States picking up the phone, calling Ottawa, and blinking. Because the math is undeniable. We can hurt Canada. We can crush their GDP. We can cause a recession in Toronto. But Canada can stop our cars. They can starve our crops. They can turn off our lights. The pain tolerance of a resource-rich nation is always higher than the pain tolerance of a consumer-rich nation. Canadians can burn wood to stay warm and eat their own wheat. Americans cannot eat iPhones. This trade war has exposed the fragility of the American empire. We expanded our influence globally, but forgot to secure our own backyard. We treated our closest ally like a vassal state, and now we are paying the price. The We Don't Need Canada movement was a bluff, and Canada just called it. As we watch the markets open on Monday, keep your eye on 3 tickers: Cameco, CCJ for uranium, Nutrien, NTR for potash, Exxon, XOM for refining margins. If those stocks are moving, the crisis is deepening. We will likely see a temporary exemption announced by the White House within 48 hours. They will call it a goodwill gesture, but we will know the truth. They looked at the empty gas tanks in the Midwest, and they realized that in 2026, the map hasn't changed. Geography is destiny, and we are stuck with each other. Thanks for watching. If you want to know how to hedge your portfolio against the breakfast tax, check out our link below. And hit subscribe, because the next domino to fall is the US auto industry, and you won't believe what's happening in Detroit right now. Let's go deeper into the aluminum crisis, because this is the specific trigger that terrifies the US military. The headline is usually oil, but the invisible crisis is metal. Aluminum is congealed electricity. To make it, you need bauxite and massive amounts of cheap power to run the smelters. Canada has Quebec. Quebec has hydro. It is the perfect aluminum factory. Alcoa and Rio Tinto operate massive smelters north of the border that feed the US manufacturing sector. Ford F-150s, Tesla chassis, Boeing fuselages, SpaceX rockets. and the armor plating on the Bradley fighting vehicle. They all run on Canadian aluminum. The U.S. produces a tiny fraction of what it consumes. Our electricity is too expensive. We shut down our smelters decades ago. When the tariffs hit, the just-in-time supply chain of the auto industry snapped. Ford has plants in Oakville, Canada, and Detroit, U.S. Parts cross the border 7 times before a car is finished. With a 25% tariff on each crossing, the profit margin is gone. Ford and GM have already announced temporary line suspensions. This means thousands of auto workers in Michigan, a key swing state, are being sent home. The UAW, United Auto Workers, is furious. They are marching on Washington, not Ottawa. They know that this trade war is killing their jobs. But the defense angle is scarier. The Department of Defense issued a report in 2025 stating that secure access to Canadian aluminum is a prerequisite for national defense strategy. If we have to buy aluminum from the open market, we are competing with China. And Chinese aluminum is dirty, coal-fired, and hit with other sanctions. We have effectively sanctioned our only clean, secure source of the metal we need to build the weapons to fight the next war. This is the autarky delusion, the belief that America can do it all alone. We can't. Not anymore. The supply chains are too deep. The integration is too complex. Trying to untangle the U.S. and Canadian economies is like trying to separate Siamese twins with a chainsaw. You might succeed, but you're going to kill the patient.
And finally, let's touch on the third rail, water. The Great Lakes. We share them. But Canada controls the northern flow. For years, the arid southwest of the U.S. has been eyeing Canadian fresh water, schemes to pipe water from Manitoba to Nevada. Canada has always said no. But in a trade war, no becomes a weapon. There are treaties governing the flow of the Columbia River. The Columbia River Treaty was up for renegotiation. If Canada decides to maximize reservoir levels on their side for hydropower needs, a plausible excuse, the water levels in Washington state and Oregon drop. The Grand Coulee Dam loses capacity. The Pacific Northwest, home to Amazon and Microsoft data centers, loses power. Water is the ultimate resource, and Canada has 20% of the world's fresh water. You can print money, you cannot print water.